Hi, John. Good evening.
Okay, we are now live. Karen, you may begin whenever you're ready.
Okay. Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to this special meeting of the Reston Association Board of Directors, Wednesday, March 2nd, 2022. The sole purpose of this meeting tonight is to hear from Supervisor Alcorn and members of his comprehensive plan task force on what they've all been up to and the status of all that, and to give our members a chance to ask questions. So this has been a much and eagerly anticipated town hall. So I'm very excited to have all of you with us tonight. We have a quorum of our board, and so I'm going to officially call this meeting to order. And I would like to have an approval of the agenda for this evening.
So move.
Okay, thank you. And is there a second?
Second.
Okay, I don't think we need any discussion, but if we do, now is the time. Okay, all those in favor?
Hi.
Okay, anybody opposed? Okay, we have adopted the agenda. Member comments are listed on the agenda. This is a town hall, so there will be a question and answer period following the presentation. So, and any member comments really should pertain to the subject matter of this meeting. So if anyone has a burning desire to make a member comment right now, I will certainly recognize you, but just know that there is a town hall scheduled. And I see Mr. Flashman's hand.
Good evening, everybody. I'm very pleased to be here with you this evening and to hear what Supervisor Alcorn has to say about the Comprehensive Plan Task Force. As you may know, or many of you may know, I am running for the be a director representing Lake Ann and Tall Oaks, as are Glenn Small running at large and Lori Dodd for North Point. And we are pleased to see this happening. And just to ask that everybody please vote. The other point I wanted to draw your attention to is that in the minutes, or not the minutes, the agenda, there is a link to what is supposed to be viewed for this evening, and the link does not work. It says page not found. So I wonder whether you can do something to remedy
that. Christina, is there something that can be done about that and put in chat?
I believe I did put a link in chat, but see if that works for people.
It does work.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Okay. I'm testing it now just to see. Yes, it does. Thank you.
Okay. Was that it?
That's it. Thank you.
Okay.
Good evening.
All right. Okay, if there are no other member comments, I'm going to, he doesn't need any introduction, but to introduce Supervisor Alcorn. Thank you very much for being here tonight. And I know we also have John Mooney and Lynn Mulston who will be presenting for us tonight. So take it away.
All right, Karen, thank you very much. I want to thank Reston Association for the opportunity to both host this public forum and also to provide feedback on this update of the comprehensive plan for Reston. I do have actually a couple of intro slides, and most of the presentation will be done by task force members. And then after we do a brief presentation, kind of back and forth, then there'll be an opportunity for folks to ask questions. And we're blessed tonight to have a number of task force members. I see several on the screen right now. I want to thank them for not only being here tonight, but also actively participating in the 45, count them, different official meetings of the task force, and not the subcommittee or subgroup meetings, that got to the point where we are right now, which is interim recommendations from the task force. So, Jose, I guess at this point, should we put up the slides, or whoever has the controls? There we go. It's Christina tonight. All right, great. Okay, well, let's go to the next slide. All right, I gave a shout out to, in general, to task force members. Here's the list of folks that participated in the process. Obviously, this was quite a time commitment. A number of you spent not just those 45 meetings, but many other meetings as well, and calls in between. And I do want to give a special shout out, since this is RA, to a certain John Mooney, and all the work that John did on the task force. And John also led the transportation section of the task force work. And that, John, what did you have, like another dozen or so meetings just on transportation, I believe?
I think so.
Okay, so let's go to the next slide. Okay, so as I mentioned, these are interim recommendations of the task force. The comprehensive plan, just as background for everyone who may not be as far into the land use stuff as some of us, the comprehensive plan is the guide for future development in Fairfax County, and actually across the Commonwealth. It's the officially statutory recognized guide for what local governments are planning for the future for their locality. So it is taken very seriously in Fairfax County. It's kind of like a gospel, I guess you could say. We spend a lot of time trying to get it right, and then a lot of time following it as developers come through the process and ask for rezoning applications or apply for rezoning applications. It also guides the placement of public facilities and is very important for certain infrastructure pieces like transportation, and other public facilities that will be touched on this evening. So they are under review currently by county staff. This is some initial feedback did just go to task force members today. County staff got some initial written feedback to task force members, but that review in more detail is ongoing. And also the transportation chapter is undergoing a particularly thorough review by the County Department of Transportation. We are in an interim public outreach period right now before the task force finalizes its recommendations, which I would project at May. Hopefully in May, the task force will get back together, maybe through a brief series of meetings, and make any changes to their recommendations based on feedback from the public through meetings like this, and also feedback from county staff. So we'll go over timeline and further steps after that, or after the task force finalizes their work a little bit later. Go ahead to the next slide. So at this point, I will turn it over. John, is this you and Lynn today?
It is, and Lynn and I have not coordinated, so you're going to hear us coordinate live on screen here. Lynn,
I'll go first.
You want to go first?
I'll go first. I can talk to planning principles and heritage resources easily.
Sounds
but
good.
I just wanted to echo Walter's appreciation to Reston Association for having us here, and building on what Walter had mentioned about getting initial comments back from staff. We did get notification today, and that pertained to planning principles, which is the first one. So I have not had an opportunity to review those comments yet. But the other areas that we received comment back from staff was on affordable housing and heritage resources, which is the other topic that I'm going to be talking to. But in terms of planning principles, and each of these are chapters within the comprehensive plan draft. So the planning principles section was headed up by Tammy Petrine, and you can read kind of the goals and what that chapter seeks to do. So I want to point to the building on the 7 founding principles, which is the 3rd bullet. I believe that our current draft has 13 principles now. So we did build on the initial 7, and we've gone into this draft, at least before I've seen anything from staff. We had 13 that we had presented. In terms of the Heritage Resources chapter, that was led by Chris Daniel, who was involved in working on the latest Fairfax County, I guess it was an inventory that they did of Reston's, I guess, heritage. It's just an inventory, so that they are not designated as part of the heritage resource inventory, but they are eligible. So he did a fabulous job of coordinating with that Fairfax County report, and then also working with some of the local folks. I know he coordinated, Walter, with Barbara Nave, who is your designee to that committee. So now that you all have the link to the draft of the comprehensive plan, I'd like to encourage you all to go in and take a look. I promise you it won't put you to sleep. It's really some good stuff. And if you have any questions on planning principles or heritage resources before we move on to John. Okay, thank you. I'll be back.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn.
So transportation, that was headed by really a team. Gary Maupin, Bill Penniman, and I worked on that together. And I'm not going to read, you can read what's on the screen. I'm going to give you a little more meat when I discuss. So one of the emphases, the main emphasis really was to strengthen the multimodal transportation nature of transportation in Reston by improving both facilities and services, whether for active mobility modes like walking and biking, or transit or private occupancy vehicle. And also by placemaking, which makes all those modes more attractive to use. We stressed the connectivity between areas of Reston. So transportation should connect us area-wise, and it should also connect us in terms of modes of transportation. So for example, how do we get to Metro? We also attended to the environmental, community health, and equity dimensions of the Reston transportation system. Public facilities, that was done by, Lynn, help me here, or Walter.
Charles Colby.
Yes, Charles Colby. It's a very fine chapter. It covers all the facilities maintained by, whether by local government or by nonprofits, that meet critical recreational and social service needs. So it includes all the government facilities like the, Walter's office, the schools, fire and rescue, law enforcement, library, health and human services, public housing for the homeless, recreation and entertainment, and water and sewer. And so there's a wonderful inventory of the public facilities and also plan for the future. Thanks.
Okay. Is Christine in the driver's seat? Thank you, Christine. Is it Christine or Christina?
Christina.
Thank you, Christina.
Sure, no
so
problem.
this is good. So John, I think that that we picked the right order because you landed on transportation and I landed on land use. So, yeah, and the land use chapter, I think, is probably one of the more voluminous chapters in the comprehensive plan. And I do have to give a shout out to Tammy Petrine, Gary Maupin, Jennifer Juszczyk. Did I say Tammy Petrine and Gary Maupin and Dennis Hayes? And Commissioner Carter, who really helped guide us in transforming the land use chapter into something that was easier for folks to get through and understand. So as you can read here, the goal was to provide clear vision for development. And we really tried to focus on the Reston's planning principles, and also bringing in some of the design guidelines, and also a lot of visuals, because we felt that the previous plan had a lot of text, but as we all know, a picture is worth 1,000 words. So this draft of the chapter has a lot of visual imagery. And we set out to communicate the planning and design recommendations to all of the stakeholders, and we did go into some site-specific recommendations. And we wanted to ensure that the process was transparent and equitable in terms of the community engagement in the land use process. And I will say that we had 2,156 edits to this chapter. So we really gave it quite a bit of rigor. In terms of the next chapter, the affordable housing, that was headed up by David Vanel. I think David's on this call, so shout out to David. And I know he worked very closely with staff to reach a great draft for the affordable housing chapter. And it really built on the language in the current plan in terms of the bonus density that is afforded to developers. But the key here is we all know that we are in a housing crisis, and the work that David did to work in the ordinance for WDUs, workforce development units, and affordable development units is noteworthy and definitely worth a read. John? Oh, any questions on land use or housing before we move on? Okay, thank you. John?
Thank you. Let me get myself together here. So the next one is parks. And I believe that was Tammy, Bill Penniman, and also Larry, wasn't it?
It was Jennifer Juszczyk and Larry Butler.
Jennifer and Larry. Okay, I'm messing these up terribly.
I think that we had a lot of input from several folks, and Tammy was certainly
okay.
one of those, yes.
Okay. So so this looks at what our parks needs are as more development occurs, which is because we're going to experience an increase in population. We have to make sure that we have the parks and open space facilities for that. So that is very carefully looked at. We look at new parks that were to develop, and looking at getting proffer contributions from developers for it, public support, looking at facilities to make sure that we do not end up with a net, minimally, not a net loss of public parks, and indeed an increase that we need. And we've stressed throughout that we need the TSA areas to make their due contribution, since they are contributing most of the new population. Environmental stewardship was done by Tammy and Bill Penniman. I think that's right.
That is correct.
And it basically begins with the proud rest and heritage that we inherited from Bob Simon, that we are a community harmoniously integrated into nature, and we preserve nature as much as we can. And also the fact that we were one of the original 13 communities worldwide to become biophilic communities. So those are kind of drivers, inspirations, but the chapter goes into how do we preserve watersheds, lakes, ponds, stream valleys, wetlands, tree canopy, native flora, green, how do we promote green buildings, including energy efficiency? How do we do better stormwater management, especially since we're expecting more severe and extreme weather, and looking at solar and renewable energy, and green buildings generally, and also trying to deal with abating noise and regulating lighting so that it illumines but does not cause glare and injury to living things. And also the impacts of transportation on environmental concerns. Lynn?
Thank you, Christina. Okay, thank you. Well, it just so happens that the same people that did the economic development also worked on public art. So this was also headed up by Tammy Petrine and Bill Penniman. And as you can see, the focus of this chapter is certainly to continue to develop strong partnerships with community partners to create and maintain public art projects. And then, of course, to continue and promote all forms of public art in the community and integrate that into future development. The economic development chapter was headed up by Gary Maupin. And I know, Gary, you spent quite a bit of time. I think Gary is on the call tonight. Gary spent quite a bit of time working with Charles Kapoor of the Chamber to create this chapter. And again, I have to reinforce that this all is really worth your read when it comes to you. But the economic development chapter really built on Reston's recognition as a hub for global and regional business and innovation. And while we recognize that we have lost some of our innovative commercial tenants, we are hoping to get that inventory built back up. It does outline clear policy goals to support economic development. And the focus is on business and job retention for all businesses, including small and medium-sized businesses. So did you all have any questions on public art or economic development? Okay, John?
Okay. The last one that I will handle, because Walter will handle the equity one, is community health. And this was done by Michelle, and she's here today too, I believe. And I want to point out that that what Michelle did is a first for Fairfax County. We will be the first comprehensive plan to have a chapter on community health. And just as you'll hear Walter say that our vision of equity is an interwoven one, that is interwoven with all the other elements, so also Michelle made this chapter, you might say, interwoven community health, tied into all the other dimensions of the plan. And community health is defined not just as physical health, but emotional well-being, quality of life for everyone who lives, works, or plays in the community. And it looks at 4 basic systems: improving healthcare itself and services, promoting living, promoting healthy and active living, supporting healthy food systems. We've all heard of food deserts. Building green neighborhoods and incorporating healthy building principles, because our built environment affects our health. And finally, encouraging the social cohesion, which is so important for mental health. It also has a special attention to how the effects of bad health impacts frequently fall disproportionately on the underserved and underrepresented communities among us, especially low-income communities and people of color. So that is also an element in that chapter.
Well, John, I'll pick it up here. Thank you for that segue actually to equity. Similar to community health, this would be a new element of comprehensive planning in Fairfax County. Does not exist at this point. And actually, there's no better place in the county to start this than Reston. The idea, and this is spelled out in a section of the interim recommendation, but it's also it is, as John mentioned, woven throughout, is that communities that have not necessarily benefited from all the economic activity in Reston and the surrounding areas should be considered in the land use review process, in the zoning review process, and in the public facility planning process. So I do want to give a shout out. Michelle Kimmel did a lot of work on this one. Lynn was on the equity subgroup, as well as Alvarez Lascend, and also Reston Bell, and I think a couple of other folks. So anyway, this is a new area, and it's something that I think Reston will really set the pace for the rest of the county in terms of incorporating equity in the comprehensive plan. Let's go to the next slide, and then just a couple more, and then we'll open it up for comments or questions. So this is a fun one, population. So this is not a task force recommendation, but as background, one of the initial areas of analysis that the task force coordinated, and I want to give a shout out to Larry Butler for helping with these population estimates, was a very basic question. Under the currently adopted comprehensive plan for Reston, what would Reston's population be if, by some amazing feat, all the density in the comprehensive plan were actually built? So there's a range, the numbers that came back, and the range depends on whether or not landowners who have an option of maximizing non-residential development on their property or maximizing residential development on their property choose one or the other. So you add up all those numbers, you get to, under the current comprehensive plan, somewhere between a population of roughly 127,000 to 157,000. So that's background and has been background to the task force going through the process. That's what exists in the comprehensive plan now. So there's one other element that is not in the interim recommendations, is still under review, and I would welcome any thoughts as this is being worked on, and that's the concept of earned density. So it basically is a question, are there elements in the current recommendation of the comprehensive plan, or what's going to be in the comprehensive plan, are there things that should be earned density criteria? So we could think about this in a couple of different ways. One way to think about it is developers should earn their density by perhaps giving back to the community, maybe addressing some of the equity issues that we were just talking about. Another thing that perhaps developers might be expected to do is earn density by more than offsetting their impact on public facility systems. Currently, developers are expected, for example, to contribute to schools to offset the impact of new students that would be attending Fairfax County Public Schools as a result of these new residents coming and living in these properties. But perhaps going beyond that is something that we would establish as earned density. This is one that unfortunately there's nothing in the recommendation at this point on that, but it is under additional review and is something that would welcome comment on. Let's go to the next slide. So this is the overall timeline. In January of a little over 2 years ago, it was actually my first board matter after I got sworn into the Board of Supervisors, was to do this review of the comprehensive plan for Reston. The task force meeting started in May of that year. We are now at interim recommendations. We're doing initial community engagement. The first meeting actually we had last week was with the Reston Chamber. Got feedback from a number of Reston Chamber members. And I want to thank all the task force members that participated in that. And then also we will have a final task force recommendation. Again, we're looking at May for that. And then through the rest of the summer, we'll be doing additional public outreach. I look forward to hearing feedback from all different areas of Reston, different parts of Reston, different communities. Basically anybody that we can find that might have any interest in this comprehensive planning process and might have any willingness to dive into it a little bit and provide feedback. We'll be doing that this summer. The fall will be the Planning Commission will get the recommendation from the task force, from staff, and any additional input coming from the community during the summer. And then the Planning Commission will have a public hearing, and then we'll make its recommendation to the Board of Supervisors. And then we will have a public hearing at the Board of Supervisors, after which we will adopt an updated comprehensive plan. So I do want to, and actually, let's see, is there one more slide, Christina? All right, well, that's a perfect time for me to, I just want to give a shout out to Lynn and John. Thank you for leading through this presentation. And you've mentioned several other folks that are here that were on the task force and are on the task force. And I'll just mention them. I see, let's see, David Vanell, Gary Maupin, Jennifer Juszczyk, Michelle Kimmel, I believe Mark Malcolm's on, Tammy Petrine, and I think I saw Mike Jennings as well, perhaps. So there may be others. Thank you all for this. Oh, and of course, Larry Butler. Larry, thank you as well for your incredible wealth of knowledge in going through this process. So with that, Karen, I'll turn it back over to you if you want to see if there are questions, comments, and you're welcome to start out. And we do have a number of task force members who are able to provide additional feedback or insight, and I think on just about anything that anybody might have interest in today.
We do, and they've all been made co-hosts so they can respond as well. So I see Mark Lipari has his hand raised. Are you able to unmute, Mark?
How's that? Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay, the first question I have is curiosity. When we talk about Reston's population going potentially to 128,000 or 158,000, over what time period are we projecting this?
There is no projection. I'll take that one. There is no projection of the time period. That's why it's a hypothetical number. And, as I said, if through some feat it could ever happen, which I don't think it ever would. Basically, if every landowner maximized the amount of density that's in the current comprehensive plan, that's where you'd end up.
I see. Okay, so my question of substance. Now that we're in 2 years of the pandemic and we've learned all these different things about lifestyle, about work habits, and so on and so forth, how did that or does that factor into your planning? And I can see that everything from people working from home versus being in the offices, When I drive around the community, I see an awful lot of for rent signs up in front of buildings. It has an impact on our mental health because people aren't socializing the way they were. So I'm curious as to how you factored that into your discussions.
Walter, I can comment on that from the transportation point of view.
And I
Yeah,
can
please,
comment
John.
from land use.
Great. And anyone else?
So a good bit of news that we received about a month ago is that Fairfax County Department of Transportation was finally agreed after a number of years of trying to make it happen jointly, we and they. They are doing a study of the impacts of the development in the TSAs, not just on the TSAs. That was studied by the county 2 or 3 years ago, but rather the impact of that TSA development on transportation in non-TSA Reston. And in connection with that, we've had discussions, Fairfax County DOT and I have had discussions on how do we factor in the COVID factor. In other words, the diminishment of people working from offices, the greater acceptability of working from home. And the fact is we don't have good data for it, in transportation at least. We know that there was an effect. We see a lingering effect, but we cannot project what that effect will be 20, 30 years out. We cannot, they say we don't have any good evidence on that. They're going to be working on it as they work on this project, this study of non-TSA intersections, but which by the way should be done by the fall. But we went over that in great detail just last week, and they said their modelers do not have good estimates what that lingering effect will be and how long it will last. But we know it's there. And we've talked about it many times in the task force.
Thank you.
Thank you, John. And Lynn, I think you wanted to respond.
Yeah, I was going to say, just from a land use perspective, because we did spend quite a bit of time discussing this during our deliberations as we were creating and editing the land use chapter. And we went back to some of the key principles and the metrics that Reston tries to adhere to, and that is a jobs to housing ratio of 50-50. But one of the things that we talked about was taking those existing buildings and repurposing those, not necessarily shifting them to residential, but repurpose those buildings, and whether it's higher education, it's some other commercial entity. But again, this is a 5-year plan. We do not know what the lingering effect of COVID is going to be. And it would be to our detriment to plan something that is going to destroy that jobs to housing balance. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Michelle, I know you wanted to respond to this also.
Sure. I'm glad you brought this one up, because this was the part of the reason why we decided to add a community health plan or a chapter to the plan. And it was recognizing a few things. First, I don't know if everyone saw, but it went around online quite a bit, but Reston was chosen as the best place to work from home, according to Money Magazine. And that's due in large part to the amazing amenities that we have because of the Reston Association. And so part of this was also saying, okay, well, as we're looking at possibly doubling our population, how are we going to ensure that we're also doubling amenities? Or how are we going to ensure that they have the same access and that we maintain the same access to what makes this community so strong and a place where we've all chosen to live? But it was also saying, that is we're looking at health and where we live in land use, but there's another component of that too. And when we're talking about possibly doubling the population, do we have the healthcare services and providers that we need to meet that population? And so that's what we were looking at. But I think that there have been a number of other issues that COVID in particular has just really brought to the forefront, especially on the equity issue. And I think that what has separated Reston so much was that we planned for these things. I think that maybe has been lacking in recent years. And so hopefully what we're trying to do and what the community has put forward starts that up again and starts that conversation and really looks and says, how can we again create a community where people want to live and have access to everything that makes the community livable, walkable, and a place you want to live, work, and play. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any other responses to this question, or can we move on to another questioner? No, Tammy, you have your hand up. Is that to respond to this question? Okay, then I'm going to take Lynn Brown has her hand up, and then Tammy, I will recognize you.
Thank you, Karen. I think this has been an interesting presentation, but it's actually at quite a high level. So the devil is always in the details and not in the high level principles at some sense. And for my community, obviously, one of the biggest issues currently is the new grade separated interchange that's proposed at Fairfax County Parkway and Sunrise Valley. It was included in the last plan without any consultation whatsoever. And this plan moves slightly forward by saying that it's included, but they should consult with us. But frankly, 392 households against the state and the county doesn't seem like a very fair fight to me. So I think consultation will be a checkbox issue. But for me, it brings me to a bigger principle, which I think is not being considered. Reston is an aging community now in terms of a development context. So, you know, the county's already admitted that the construction of this junction will involve eminent domain. And if you know the junction, it's pretty clear it's going to involve some of Reston homes just because of how the junction is currently set up. I would like to know what the RA position is on eminent domain issues going forward, because it strikes me that by now we should have a position. Does the county or the state get to take homes without anything? Do we have a set of guidelines that says under this criteria, RA will support the state or the county going for eminent domain? If so, what are the criteria? Because I think as we go forward in Reston, this is going to be an increasing problem. It's probably also going to be related to equity, because I suspect if you want to take $1 million home, it's a lot more complicated than taking one of our low income community homes. So, I mean, I'd like to know how RA is planning to look at eminent domain, because to me, eminent domain and what is essentially Reston defined as a planned community, they really don't belong in the same sentence. You can't have eminent domain and planned community. So I'd like to know what RA is going to do going forward in terms of determining the principles of how it's going to address eminent domain issues.
Thank you, Lynn. Is there someone here who would, from RA, who would like to respond to that? And a task force
if he's
member.
willing to do, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say an RA member who was also a task force member. So hello, John.
So what I'm going to comment on is the only thing that I have anything bordering on competence to comment on, and that's the transportation aspect of it. Probably we would turn to our Reston Association memory bank, Larry Butler, to say what has Reston Association dealt with this problem in the past. So just to comment on it, as Lynn knows, she and a contact team of several folks from the polo fields have been discussing with me and with Karen and with Larry, and trying to set up conversations with Fairfax County to deal with this issue of this specific grade separated intersection proposed for the intersection of Sunrise Valley Drive and Fairfax County Parkway. We did, as Lynn said, put into the comprehensive plan a proviso that before anything bordering on final design is begun, not finished, but begun, that we would have conversations, that Fairfax County DOT would have conversations with the community, and they would include the broader community because, as I'll point out, this is part of a broader corridor development. I'll talk about that in a bit. But anyway, that we would have this consultation early on, because this is not planned to be started, if it is started before 2038. So there's a while for us to get our stuff together on this. And so we're still trying to craft appropriate language that makes this a serious consultation to see what the alternatives are to widening, and is it necessary. I will also point out, secondly, that this is not just this intersection. This is the whole Fairfax County, Springfield, Franconia Parkway corridor that goes virtually all the way from Route 7 it goes from Route 7 to virtually I-95. And the long-term plan, which began to be laid out in, as Lynn said, in 2014-15, dealt with widening that ultimately to 6 lanes. Is that going to be necessary? And then the widening, and it's not just the intersection, this grade separated intersection that would take private property, it's the very widening itself. So it's a very complex thing, and it's not just in Reston, it's that whole corridor. And that brings me to my third point, and this was one of the great tensions in the transportation chapter. It's the tensions between, first of all, development is the ultimate creator of traffic. That is the major internal creator of traffic. There's pass-through traffic from outside the community, but most of the transportation inside the community is created by development. But it's also created by the modes of transportation that we choose. And so the more we are car reliant, the more and wider roads we need. And so that was one of the things that we struggled with in the task force, that tension between letting everyone choose his or her preferred mode of mobility in the multimodal system, but recognizing that what the modes we choose have effects. And that is a struggle going on in every big city and in small areas, medium-sized areas like us. It is throughout the nation, that is a big struggle.
Karen, it's Walter. If I could also chime in. John, thank you for that. And I would just say, thank you, Lynn, for your comments. And I certainly would welcome anyone who wants to suggest guidelines for use of eminent domain. I would welcome that. I do want to point out that it is not so rare. As a matter of fact, we recently, Fairfax County, on a motion that I made at the Board of Supervisors a few months ago, approved using eminent domain to get a few pieces of property around Wheelie Avenue, basically where the W&OD goes over Wheelie. We're trying to get that bridge in. The bridge, the W&OD bridge over Wheelie has been, frankly, it's been slowed down because there's several property owners there, and a couple of them were completely non-responsive. I'm not even sure there's anybody on the other end of the line to answer the phone. There's some commercial properties in there, almost forgotten, I'm afraid. So we did, and I did on my motion, authorize use of eminent domain to get a few of those pieces so that we can get the pedestrian bridge over Wheelie finally built. But that said, would welcome any input from RA or anyone on what principles should be followed in using eminent domain. It's a very powerful tool.
Thank you, Walter. Any other task force members who want to address Ms. Brown's points? Okay, then Tammy, you're up. And you're muted. You should be able to unmute yourself at this point. There you
Thank
go.
you. I would like to, since we're having an RA meeting, I feel it absolutely critical to thank certain RA personnel. One of them is Jennifer Justchuk. She worked her butt off on this plan. She and Michelle Kimmel spent 2 years researching public health. She was instrumental with the Transportation Committee, which was probably the most complex committee with trying to sort that out. It's a real bear. Land use, she was instrumental. You on the board already know she has a very interesting, unique perspective on things that I have not heard from anybody else, and I really value that. So thank you, Jennifer Justchuk. Also, your EAC committee is outstanding. The environmental stewardship chapter could not have come off without the help of Doug Britt and William Peggies. I cannot thank them enough for their generous expertise. We have no clue how many brilliant, generous people are in Reston who offer to help. And I'm so grateful for that help. I want to also call attention to something that people who aren't on the task force may not have a grasp of. Those of us on the task force have heard this multiple times, so they get it. But the developers or certain developers have put an eagle eye on golf course development. What you must understand is the density, residential density, that could have gone to the golf course when Reston was planned was put elsewhere. The golf courses include pipelines, which you can't build on, and floodplains, which you can't build on. But any other viable property enclosed in the bounds of both golf courses, that density was put elsewhere. It does not exist. So that's off limits. So that needs to be understood. And lastly, land use is like a chemical formula. It's very tricky to get this right. And we spent literally thousands of hours researching and backing into numbers to try to get everything right. And so that this chapter, when you as a landowner want to look at your parcel and see what you are allowed to do, it is now very obvious through use of maps and a very thorough description of what's allowed, if you have to have commercial and residential as a partnership, or whether that is not a requirement. So thank you all, the new faces I see here. I'm thrilled, and please ask questions. This has been a trip. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tammy. Okay, are there more questions? I don't see any hands raised at the moment. Mark Lipari, is that your hand up again?
Yeah, that's me again.
That's you again.
I can always come up with questions.
Sure. Okay.
This is a transportation related question, and it's kind of bugged me for past couple of years since the metro has been extended out to Reston. Is there any plan to provide public parking or some kind of public access parking to the metro station and town center? it's kind of kludgy the way they're doing Boston Properties charging for parking, and I don't know, it doesn't seem like it's very user friendly for us. Consequently, my wife and I really don't take advantage of Metro the way we probably could. You know, we just figure we're just going to get in the car and not have to deal with the hassles of parking.
Who would like to take that?
John, do you want me to take that one? I can.
Yes.
Why don't you do that, Walter?
Yeah. The short answer is there are no plans either in the current comprehensive plan nor in the task force recommendation to include public parking or public parking garage at the Reston Town Center station. One station over at the Herndon station, also known as Herndon Monroe, there are actually 2 public parking garages over there. So, and then of course, the other direction, the existing Wheelie Reston East station also has I would say an even oversized parking garage, given when that no longer is the terminus of the Silver Line. So, but at this point, there are no plans for the Reston Town Center station. And John, that's correct, right? There was no change on that in the task force recommendation.
No.
Thank you.
Yeah, Michelle, did you want to respond to that?
I did, but just slightly different too, where I think that we're going to have some property owners coming back at the Wheelie Metro station, where they're going to be looking at how they're going to redevelop that station. And to your point, a little differently though, we have to take into consideration, will the community have access to the Metro? Because these property owners do serve as the gatekeepers to Metro. And so if we don't have access via, ample and easy to use public parking, or let's say, what about also a kiss and ride, or, really quality bus service? Can we walk there? Or how is that incorporated into the actual replanning and application of the development? I don't know that we're seeing that yet, but I am hopeful that that's going to be something that will be taken into consideration, because otherwise they've got a monopoly on Metro, but it was everyone here who helped fund that and pay for that and continues to do so. And so we need to make sure that that's open to the entire community.
Thank you, Michelle. Okay, David Wiley's hand is up.
Evening.
There you go.
Yeah.
Hi, David.
Hi. Yesterday you sent out a message about Reston National Golf Course to, I guess, Hunter Mill residents, I think, and whoever was on your email list. I thank you for that message. And, there is a Hidden Creek as well, a private golf course that I think in the past you said that issue is closed, which I think I would assume that it remains a public golf course. For Reston National, given that it's a public course, is this item also closed in your opinion, or what do you think the ongoing status of that potential development might be?
Yeah, David, thank you. Thank you for the question. For Hidden Creek, the developer, or the would-be developer, the owner of Hidden Creek, spent a good year and a half trying to convince the community that redevelopment was the way to go. And I said, and I've said all along, even before I got elected to this job, that I would listen to communities surrounding the golf course on whether or not there should be any change in the comprehensive plan, which, by the way, currently says golf course for both Hidden Creek and Reston National. So Reston National, frankly, the owners there started a little bit later, and they're kind of in, I would say, the middle of their public outreach. So the message I sent out yesterday was to all Restonians that had contacted me with concerns about it. And I have to tell you, the concerns are overwhelmingly one way at this point. But basically, I want to give the opportunity for the Reston National owners to make their pitch and to talk to the community. But I'm not going to let that go forever. So I'm listening, and I continue to listen to what the community surrounding the golf course are telling me. And unless I hear them say, change the comprehensive plan, I will not support that. And at some point, I will close that issue.
Just for a basis for understanding this, the current plan, so the 2014-15 plan, says on my printout, page 44, the Reston National and Hidden Creek Country Golf Club are golf courses that are planned for private recreation use, more specifically to remain as golf courses. And that same language remains in the current plan, the current draft at least.
Thank you, John. Dave, did that answer your question sufficiently? Dave Wiley.
Yeah, I think I understand the difference between the Hidden Creek and Reston National, and sounds very fair to me to all parties involved. We'll obviously keep track of what's going on. Over.
Okay, I think
Thank
Bob.
you. Please
Petrini-
do.
Oh, sorry. Bob Petrini, you have your hand up?
Yes.
And then next will be Al Gonser.
The issue that I have is one that I've had trouble getting my head wrapped around. Reston is approximately 7,500 plus acres. I'm not aware that any developer wants to become covenanted as part of Reston's master deed, nor is the county desirous of expanding the size of Reston. Given that we're already at 65,000 people, and it is, as Lynn Brown pointed out, largely developed, how are we going to accommodate all of the amenities that another 60,000 plus people are going to demand as we go forward without substantive changing in zoning?
That's, yes. What, Walter, did you want to address? I don't.
Well, that was the mission of the task force. I mean, that was front and center in my board matter. Basically, does the currently planned development for Reston, is the currently planned infrastructure sufficient, including community facility, parks, transportation, all that. And that really was that's really what the task force wrestled with. And I welcome any task force members that have any specific insights or otherwise. But that was the same question, Bob, that I had too.
Are you saying, one quick follow-on question is, do you think this, the draft plan addresses a sufficient number of the issues that you laid out initially to be effective?
Well, I think it does. It actually addresses, I think, most of the issues that I laid out, and actually a lot more that I didn't put in there. Michelle mentioned community health. I didn't know the pandemic was going to happen. But that actually is part of the point of this public engagement process too. I mean, I want to hear what you have to say about it. What are your concerns? What do you think might be missing or might need additional thought or analysis before this goes final? We've got, about 9 months. Well, no, I guess about 8 months before this would be finalized. So we have a little time, but that's part of the process here. I am withholding judgment on the task force recommendation, other than to thank everybody and recognize all the work that was done and the depth of the recommendation. I'm holding judgment on saying this is the path until basically until it gets to me on the Board of Supervisors.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Michelle, to this issue?
Yes, to this issue. I think that's a great question, Bob. I think we also have to recognize that this is one group that's looking at this, and that there are other groups that are looking at it from the perspective of, are you asking for too much? And we don't think that we should have to provide those amenities, and the RA amenities should suffice for everyone. And so I think we have to look at it also from just that counter narrative and what others might be saying too. I mean, just giving you one example, one of the goals of the TSA, the areas near the metro, is that they're going to be walkable and livable. But we have two major developments coming in that are more than a mile or 24 minutes from walking distance from a grocery store. Some of us would argue that's not a walkable area, even if it's right next door to a metro. And yet we're putting a whole bunch of density there. And we're saying this is going to help us achieve, climate change goals, but they have to drive to get groceries. And this is an area in particular that we got a lot of pushback on. And this was something that just was seen from some people as being too much. And you can't expect that a grocery store needs to be in a walkable neighborhood. So I think we also have to keep in mind as we're reading this that, there is another side that's looking at it too. And we have to be very aware of that and really look at this and say, is there more we can do? But also, how do we support what's in here? If you do support that, I think it's important. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Linda, do you want to comment on this?
Yes, thank you for the recognition. I appreciate it. I would just like to mention that Commissioner Carter and I do have a meeting with staff later this week, I believe, to go through the land use chapter. And of course, those population figures that are in that draft, we will certainly be looking at those and getting to some form of reconciliation. I understand, John Mooney, that you and Commissioner Carter also met with staff to go through those. So I think we're closer than we are far apart. Thank you.
Goodness. Okay, thank you. The next hand I saw was from Al Gonser.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi. Yeah, thank you for taking my question. First, I'd like to make a comment. We moved here in 1993. We loved Reston at that time. Sadly, Reston is so different today than what it was like in 93. And I'm very concerned that increasing the density the way you guys are planning is going to make Reston much worse. And I frankly am not convinced which problem we're trying to solve by making the density so high in Reston. But I would like to ask my question. I live in Polo Fields, and we've now been waiting for the Monroe Metro many years for it to be completed. I'm very concerned that the major project at the corner of Fairfax County and Sunrise Valley, that is a very large project. How many years is that going to take? And is it going to be a miserable existence for those of us who have to cross there, the folks who live in Polo Fields?
Well, Al, let me first address your point about up-planning. And actually, I'll ask Lynn this. Lynn, is your recommendation up-planning Reston? You're on mute.
Oh, sorry. So you're asking, is my recommendation
is the task force
It's
recommendation?
not- The task force recommendation in terms of land use,
Right.
it's really kind of maintaining.
Yeah,
We're not up and
May
we're
I
not down.
qualify that? May I qualify
Yes.
that?
Yeah, please, John.
Yeah, the qualification to that would be that in fact, for PRC Reston, we have significantly decreased the density. We have decreased the allowable density in the village centers, in places like St. John's Woods and Charter Oak. So all told, in the non-TSA areas, there has been a decrease at least of 2,000 and I think closer to 3,000 potential. That was in the 2014-15 plan.
That's a good point, John. Thank you very much. There were some deficiencies in the plan language in the previous plan, so we did ensure that the way that language is, I guess, edited for this draft does bring the density more in alignment with what it should have been in the previous plan.
Lynn, is it also true that in the TSA, a good bit of that density has already been rezoned? So this is not adding new density. These have already gone through.
Right.
And so this is reflecting what has been already approved.
Exactly.
And
Yeah, I think
at least-
that's a really good point. Sorry, John. I think that's a really good point. When the task force was given the job to review this, there are many parcels where we had to take the numbers that have already been approved. So I know that it's a very long plan, a lot of pages to read, but I would definitely encourage people on the call to look at page 18 of the interim recommendations. There's a chart, a really good chart there that will show you what we believe is already existing and approved dwelling units that we are double checking and validating with staff on the numbers, but that's the number that's already, we think is already on the books or already built. And then the estimated remaining dwelling units, we have charted right now at 13,841 versus the 46,000 or almost 47,000 that we believe are already existing and approved.
Mark Malcolm, could I also speak just a little bit?
Yes, I was going to
Since
recognize you, Mark, for responding to this question.
I appreciate that very much. His question was focused toward the GSI. As well as John Mooney had pointed out, the current planning is that it's likely not until 2038. Very long ways away. But tied to Lynn Brown's, the issue of eminent domain, it still becomes valid at some time well before that because of the normal planning process for the 2+ acre GSI. That's the minimum size any GSI is. I've looked at that from Iowa and a number of other states about GSI. The issue that comes in with some of the transportation things, we focus with FCDOT being Fairfax County, but the roads within Fairfax County are built and maintained by VDOT with the great majority of them. So the issue comes, what happens with VDOT planning as it impacts the comprehensive plan that might need to be addressed. The additional thing that comes in for what Lynn had spoken to is, given that Reston's 2020 census population was 63,226, not including the stuff that's over in Great Oaks and Woodland that's with the Herndon TSA. On that, the population increase, what we did do in this comprehensive plan with John Carter and I working on that with the Herndon TSA is actually reduce the potential of residential units in the TSA by adhering to what were Florida air ratio, floor to area ratios versus the original, what was in 2014 through 2018, the two ultra high density parcels being the Sprint property and what is the remaining area of the Board of Supervisors property. Supervisor Alcorn has also recognized that one of the best potential uses of the undeveloped area has to do with community housing and social services potential there. And you have that parking that already exists. That can support that. The one that is also within the transportation is that access coming from Herndon and from the west, the potential need for a street connector into the Metro Herndon station from Monroe Street. I think I have hit the gamut of issues between the earlier comments from Lynn Brown and now from Al Gonster to help. Further questions, please ask.
Thanks, Mark.
Mark, can you clarify what GSI is for those that are not familiar with
My
it on our call?
apologies. Yeah, my apologies. Grade separated interchanges. When you think of a number of the intersections that have occurred along Fairfax County Parkway already, if you think what's being done along Route 7 within Fairfax County, what is being done in Loudoun County along Route 50, those are grade separated interchanges. There are about 6, 7 basic designs, but the smallest design takes just over 2+ acres. But the issue is access lanes and how far back you do that. When you talk about a grade separated interchange like that would fit the land area of Sunrise Valley and Fairfax County Parkway, it isn't just that intersection that's impacted. It's also Sunrise Valley and Glade. It's Sunrise Valley all the way up to the Metro station. And there's one intersection in Polo Fields called Thunder Chase Drive. And then the second one that's at the Herndon station, which is Milburn. They're impacted. It also impacts what is done with Sunrise Valley at Monroe, and it has impact to other intersections. That's why it was key with what John Mooney spoke to. Really important is the fall 22 completion or first results of the study of the non-TSA intersections becomes so important. And I'm very much aware because I'm out almost every day, not just in car, but also bicycling and walking. But with the car traffic, that intersection is extreme. I happen to live off of Monroe Street, and I have right now the traffic has returned to about 80 to 90% of what it was pre-COVID. Just to give ideas. Okay. Further questions, please.
Thank you, Mark. Sonia Myrick has been very patient. She's had her hand up for quite a while. So Sonia, I'm calling on you now.
Yes, thanks. My question is, how many of the new residents are projected in the count toward the Reston assessment as opposed to being in special districts?
Larry, would you like to respond to that?
Sure. Yes, we've made an attempt to get as many of the property owners to join the Reston Association. We have been successful on 4 of the 4 sale projects, none of the 4 rent projects. The county nor RA can force an individual property owner to subject themselves to Reston Association's deed and covenants. So it is essentially a value proposition we present to them. And like I said, we've been successful on most of the for sale units that have gone up on the corridor, but there's no way to force them to do that. So it is a voluntary subjection of their property to the covenants by the owners.
Thank you, Larry.
Larry, can you speak to about how many units that is and how many units RA currently has? I think that might help put it in perspective for Sonia.
Ooh, I don't have a good reading on the number of units that have been built in the corridor, and since the current comp plan went into effect in 2015.
I meant that the current number of units RA currently has, our 22,000 number, and then how
Yes,
many
about 22,000.
in the contracts we have that are coming into RA, about how many units is that?
Right. So we've got about 22,150. That includes roughly 200 units total of the 4 projects that are in the TSA. And we've got it. Well, I take that back. There's about 200 units in the TSA. 40 of those have yet to be built. The board just approved adding those recently. So about 160 right now.
And Sonia, to give you an idea, we think in the transit station areas, there's about 25,000 units up on the books approved.
Thank you, Jennifer. Yes, Michelle.
Yeah, and this is one of the areas we really struggled with, because if we can't force them to join RA, what do we do when, we have a half of the population paying for amenities that the entire population uses? How do we handle that? And so, I think we really have to address this. And, one idea could be at least figuring out how we can have them help cover the cost of things like maintaining our trails. But as we all know, that's only a small part of what RA does, and a small part of how RA benefits the entire community. So this is going to be a big issue, and one that we have to really think about, and how do we address that? And I don't know that we have a complete solution right now, but it's also something that's very frustrating too, from the perspective of the Reston Planning and Zoning Committee as well. And lately we've seen people say, well, we're in talks with RA, but they won't ever give us an answer. So this is one of significant concern that I think we do need to figure out how exactly we can make this fair and ensure that everything that we enjoy about Reston is cared for and maintained by all who do. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. I see Mr. Gonser's hand is up again.
Yeah, I'm not sure I heard an answer to how long the GSI is going to take at the intersection of Sunrise Valley and Fairfax County Parkway. Hopefully, you guys will do everything you can to finish that work as quickly as possible. I'd like to add another question. When they put in the sound walls to the south on Fairfax County Parkway to the south of Fox Mill, they cut down all of the barrier trees, and it was horrible. The houses that were nicely hidden behind the trees were now in the open. And so I'm just curious, what is the plan there? Are you going to be putting in a sound wall, north of Fox Mill on Fairfax County Parkway? And have you come up with a good plan so that we don't repeat what was done earlier? And so the houses there will have some type of a barrier left? Thank you.
Aaron, let me just say, I think those issues would be at a later point in the process. Once that really ends up being a design issue. So I'm not sure how that would fall out. All I can say is, if I happen to be supervisor at the time, this project moves forward, then I'll make sure there is extensive involvement with polo fields and all interested neighbors, including seeing those plans and making sure that everyone knows the trade-offs going into it. John, did you have something else to add?
Yeah, I wanted to give Al Gonser a bit of information, although I'm not sure how helpful it is. And that is that in the fall of 2018, Fairfax County DOT published a Reston funding plan draft cash flow, which purports to list the amounts and the timing of the various projects to deal with the additional traffic generated by the TSAs. And one of those projects is indeed the grade separated intersection. So I've already mentioned that they say the project funding, remember project funding, not construction, starts in 2038. And it has the project funding ending in 2043. But a lot of that is engineering. So that is not a construction period. That is the period during which they foresaw back in 2018 that money would be expended. So I wanted you to know that there is that information, Al, but it doesn't tell you what the construction time is by any far stretch. Does that help?
It does help, but right now you are in the planning process for a major project. And so I would think that some of these elements would enter into the go, no-go decision. Can we put in a sound barrier and still have some decent barrier for the remaining housing? I mean, is that sound barrier going to go right up against, I don't know, a couple of feet from their back door? Is this GSI going to take, 10 years, 20 years of construction, which that's a pretty major intersection. It's going to be miserable for those of us who have to use that intersection. So I would think that, yes, I agree, those are implementation type questions. However, I think that those are pertinent questions to be considered at this stage today when we're deciding whether to go forward with this plan.
Thank you. Yes, Tammy.
Please understand, this is a VDOT project, not a Reston Association project, nor is it a Reston Comprehensive Plan project. This is a VDOT thing. And with all due respect, this body of people do not have the answers you need. I know you're frustrated. I assure you that Lynn and others are wonderful lobbyists for your Polo Fields area, but we can't answer these questions. This is strictly coming from VDOT, and you have the community empathy behind you. We will stand up with you when it happens, but we can't predict when this is going to happen or how long it'll take or whose trees will be cut down. Thank you.
Thank you, Tammy. We're coming up on 8:30 and I see Lynn Brown has her hand up again, and I suspect it's about what we've been talking about. So Lynn, you're on, and then we're going to start wrapping up.
Thanks, Karen. Yeah, I wanted to come in on the sound wall issue because a few years ago, as a result of an explosion somewhere else in the country, the federal authorities decided to enforce right-of-ways on gas pipelines. And many of you may not know there's a major gas pipeline that runs along Fairfax County Parkway. As a result of that, Colonial came along and removed all the trees that line the community on the basis of the roots. I spent months and months and months trying to do a sound wall with VDOT. Virginia's basis was, unless there was any fundamental change, they couldn't do a sound wall. And I'm like, well, you've just removed all the trees and we've got a line of sight and noise. That's not a fundamental change? Seemingly not. So, I mean, I would remind people that this is not just the GSI, this is also a road widening. So the first thing we've lobbied for is, if you're going to do this, they have to be done together. Otherwise, we get at least 10 years of this going on and on. The second part of it relates also to Metro and public contracting. When Metro Herndon Monroe was being built, we had numerous power cuts that we'd never had before. We had a gas line fractured that stopped residents even being able to get to their homes. We got no compensation, and no answers about why did this keep happening? I mean, I have to call Miss Utility, and if I damage one of their pipelines, people leap up and down. But you can have a public contract that repeatedly damages infrastructure, which amounts to negligence, and there appear to have been no public compensation as a result of those things. So Al has a very valid point on, you know, if we've got to sacrifice our welfare for the benefit of the community for a junction that we don't want, then there has to be some compensation and some consideration of our way of life going forward.
Lynn, let me just jump in if I could, Karen, and thank you for that comment, and Al as well. I did commit to you and Rick to have a town hall specific to polo fields as part of the outreach for this comprehensive plan review. But Lynn, what I'd like to do is also bring the FCDOT and VDOT personnel to that meeting, because obviously there are a number of issues of concern here, including the sound wall, the timing of any GSI, I'll use that term, and road widening, and as well as the sound wall. So thank you for flagging this, Lynn, and this I think helps whenever we get to that meeting in a few months.
Great. That's good to hear. Thank you, Walter. Okay, I'm going to take one final question. And then that will be it. Nisha Subramaniam. I hope I didn't butcher.
Nailed it.
I'm sorry.
So ma'am, I have a really quick question for you. I've seen the draft plan, and I was just looking at the hospital charges in Reston. They are one of the highest in our area. This is a huge concern for a multitude of reasons. I was curious to know as to what can be done in order to manage the situation in our area.
Thank you. Who would like to take that?
What charges are you talking about?
Do you want me to? I can jump in here.
Yeah,
that's
Michelle, I think.
Yeah, that's in the community health chapter, Tammy. So when we looked at hospital prices, it's a very difficult thing to actually get information on. Pricing transparency is a huge issue nationwide. But from what we were able to see in Reston in particular, our hospital charges and prices are some of the highest in the area. And, you know, this is a complicated issue that has a lot of ways that they can be tackled on high healthcare costs. But one in particular that I think we have to look at is just the simple fact that we only have so much land. And we basically have one major provider for hospital services. And so what are we going to do if they have a monopoly on the healthcare market here in Virginia, in Reston? How do we handle that? And what do we do? And this is of great concern, but I think that there is a land use issue of encouraging other providers to participate in Reston. And so it is looking at how can we get additional, I mean, I don't think that we're going to see another hospital in Reston, but how can we see, you know, Inova owns land in Reston. So are they going to have a bigger presence, or are they backing out of our market? What's going on? So from the land use perspective, we have put forward some ideas that we think can help address that by encouraging Inova to participate more in Reston. But it is a really big issue. And I mean, it's quite frankly also a countywide issue, because when we looked countywide, we saw that we're paying substantially more than Arlington. And so why are we paying more for healthcare services than folks in Arlington? That just doesn't seem right. Something's going on, and we do need an answer there. But what we've done from a land use perspective is, again, encouraged Inova to do more here and to be a bigger player in Reston. And we think this is important too, if we're, again, trying to make this a walkable area and have a TSA that limits the amount of, miles spent in the car, you have to be able to get to healthcare providers, and you have to be able to do it easily. So that's what we put forward. And so we'll see what we're able to do there.
Thank you, Michelle. Okay. This has been great. Thank you all for attending. Thank you so much to all the task force members who attended and helped with responses to our questions. And of course, Supervisor Alcorn. As you saw in the timeline, there will be many more community outreach events on the task force. RA is very, very proud to have hosted this one tonight. Walter,
Karen, can I just jump in?
Sure, yeah, I'm going to give you wrap up opportunity.
Well, thank you so much for hosting this. And I just to dovetail on what you just said, we do have, I'm looking at my newsletter that went out today, 6 more public outreach meetings this month, starting with Reston Citizens Association coming up in 5 days, then Coalition for Smarter Growth, Reston Town Center Association, several more. This will be on the Hunter Mill webpage. So if folks think of a question they want to ask, I'm sure they can join there, or they can contact my office. Jose Del Cid is, I believe, on the phone, and hi, Jose. Great. And Jose, if you could put the office email into the chat, so if folks want to send any other thoughts via email on this interim draft, would welcome that. And then, of course, Karen, love to come back, or at least another one in the summer, when this is really, the next step, and also when it's even more formed and maybe formatted a little bit more as well. So
sure, we'll look forward to that. Absolutely. All right,
Karen.
Well, yes.
Karen,
yes.
Can we speak to kind of from an RA board perspective what our next steps are too?
Sure. Go ahead.
From a RA perspective, we've asked a lot of our committees that would have expertise or knowledge in the different chapters to review those chapters and help advise the board on things that we might want to request changes on, or things we should be advocating for. And then the board will have an opportunity to take positions on the comp plan. So I would say what we need from all of you, I know this is, 173 page plan right now and a lot of pages to read, but, to get educated and to also just share with, the RA board members individually or as a group, things that you want to see in this community. How much of the population do you think, we should have in Reston? What should it look like? What should our amenities be? What developments have come in where things have worked really well and you'd like to see that in the future? What things haven't worked well? Those are all comments and sharing of thoughts that would be really helpful, I think, to the RA board as we attempt to help represent all of you as members. So thank you for all the things that you'll do to share with us.
Yes, thank you, Jennifer. Good points. Yeah, and we've already heard tonight about the involvement of our environmental advisory committee with the task force, which is great. And I know our Parks and Recreation Advisory Committee and our Multimodal Transportation Advisory Committee are all going to be getting involved. So that's great. Let's keep the communication lines open. Thank you all so much for being here. Really appreciate the time, and we look forward to the next time we do this.
Thank you for hosting.
Thank you. Thank you, Walter. Thank you, Jose, all you task force people, board members, Christina, Larry. Have a good evening, everybody.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Karen, do you want a motion to adjourn?
Thank you. Yes, that would be a good thing. This is a special board meeting. Yes, can I have a motion to adjourn?
I'll motion.
Second.
Thank you, John. All board members in favor?
Aye.
Hopefully we still have quorum here. Yes.
I think we do.
I think we
Just
did. All right, we are adjourned. Good evening,
Thank you.
everybody.
good night.
Thanks, everybody.